Kylo Thea, Nebulan top xenobiologist of the Galactic Federation, prided herself on being unflappable. She dissected the venomous Zargo of Bju, decoded the reproductive cycle of the quantum-shifting quasar, and even won a staring contest with a Medusa. But nothing could have prepared her for the shock of studying human males. It started as just another assignment. The Federation had recently welcomed the Terrans into the fold, and Kylo was tasked with assessing their biological compatibility. She expected the usual: a quick probe, a few tissue samples, and then off to the next world. But when she pulled up the initial scans, she spat out her nebuloni and nectar in disbelief. By the 7 moons of Mag-Era, this can't be right. She counted again and again, but the numbers didn't lie. Human males produce thousands of gametes per day. She cross-referenced with the database, sure it had to be an error. Even the mighty Thoron only mustered a few hundred berm at the peak of their 30-year cycle. But there it was, plain as a Plutonian nose, human male, estimated daily sperm count, 280 million. Kylo felt faint. The implications were staggering. If each of those sperm could fertilize an egg. She ran the projections and nearly fell out of her hover chair. A single human male could theoretically father thousands of offspring every single day. She pulled up an image of a human specimen. At first glance, they seemed unremarkable bipeds, a bit gangly, with patchy fur on their heads. But knowing what lurked beneath those unassuming exteriors, Kylo Thea shivered. The more she studied their files, the stranger things got. Humans didn't have a mating season. The males were always fertile, ready and raring to go. And if the cultural archives were to be believed, they went at it like Relian rabbits. How did they find time for literally anything else? Kylo's heart raced as an unbidden thought crept in. What would it be like to... No, it was ludicrous. She was a scientist, not some hormone-addled adolescent. Still, the idea of all that raw virility. Focus, Kylo. She needed to clear her head. Abandoning her research, she stalked out of the lab, nearly colliding with a passing figure. "Watch it, you cowl." The words died on her lips. It was him, the human from the files. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall and broad, with piercing blue eyes and a rogue grin. "Whoa there, green stuff, you okay? Looks like you've seen a ghost." You?" Kylo stammered, suddenly feeling very warm. "Stars." Even his voice oozed confidence. She couldn't tear her gaze away from his chiseled jaw, his full lips that no doubt had. The human cocked his head, confused but still smiling. "I'm Jake. By the way, guess you're my welcoming committee." He stuck out a hand. Kylo stared at it blankly, her mind reeling with the knowledge of what those hands were capable of. "I have to go," she blurted, all composure forgotten. She bolted down the corridor, leaving a very puzzled Jake in her wake. Back in her quarters, she collapsed on the bed, heart pounding. This assignment had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. How was she supposed to do an objective assessment when she couldn't even look at a human without imagining things? Kylo Thea groaned and buried her face in a pillow. Curse those Terrans. Curse their absurdly potent parts. This was going to be the longest research mission of her career, and maybe, just maybe, the most exciting. Over the next few days, Kylo threw herself into her research with a fervor that bordered on obsession. She pored over every available file on human physiology, culture, and history, determined to unravel the mystery of their prodigious fertility. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. How did human society function with such constant sexual tension? Did they have any mating rituals, or was it just a free-for-all? Dear Cosmos, the logistics of their adult entertainment industry boggled the mind. Kylo knew she needed a first-hand account, for science, of course. And if that meant spending some quality time with a certain ruggedly handsome specimen, well, that was just a bonus. She found Jake in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. He turned as she approached, flashing that knee-weakening grin. "Well, if it isn't my favorite Martian. I was starting to think you were avoiding me." "What?" "No, I've just been busy, with science." Smooth, Kylo, real smooth. She cleared her throat. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with my research. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Oh, really? And what exactly does this research entail? Kylo felt her cheeks flush. Stars, was he flirting with her? I need to learn more about human mating customs for my report. Ah, of course, for the report. Jake's eyes sparkled with mischief. Well, far be it from me to stand in the way of scientific inquiry. Ask away, Doc. Kylo took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Right, let's start with the basics. How often do humans typically engage in sexual activity? Jake leaned back, considering. Well, that varies a lot from person to person. Some folks are happy with once a week. Others want it every day. And then there are the real overachievers who go for multiple rounds per day. Kylo Thea's eyes widened. Multiple rounds? As in more than one mating session within a single rotation. Oh yeah, it's not uncommon for humans to have sex a few times a day, especially when we're really into someone. Jake winked, sending a shiver down Kylo's spine. She swallowed hard, trying to focus. And what about refractory periods? How long does it take for a human male to recover between rounds? Again, it varies. Some guys need a few hours. Others are ready to go again in just a few minutes. Jake's grin turned wicked. Personally, I've never had any complaints in that department. Kylo felt her face flush, images of Jake's stamina flooding her mind. She hurried on to her next question. What about mating rituals? Do humans have any specific customs or practices? Oh, we've got all sorts. Candlelit dinners, long walks on the beach, dancing under the stars. But honestly, the best foreplay is just good old-fashioned flirting, teasing each other, building that tension until you can't take it anymore. Jake's voice had dropped an octave, sending tingles through Kylo's body. Stars, the way he was looking at her, like he wanted to devour her whole. She licked her suddenly dry lips. And what about physical attributes? What do humans find most attractive in a mate? That's the beauty of humanity. We're attracted to all kinds. Some like M tall, some like M small, curvy, skinny, muscular, soft. But if you ask me, the sexiest thing of all is confidence, knowing what you want, and not being afraid to go for it. Kylo was finding it increasingly difficult to breathe. The way Jake's eyes smoldered, the suggestive tilt of his head, it was like he was undressing her with his gaze. She forged ahead, determined to maintain some semblance of professionalism. What about erogenous zones? Where do humans like to be touched? Jake's smile turned downright sinful. Oh, we've got all the classics. Neck, ears, inner thighs. But the real magic happens when you find those secret spots. The ones that make your partner melt with just a whisper of a touch. He leaned forward, voice husky. For example, did you know that the skin on the inside of the wrist is incredibly sensitive? Just imagine trailing your fingers along it, feather-light, watching your lover shiver with anticipation. Kylo bit back a whimper, suddenly feeling like her uniform was far too tight. Jake's words painted vivid pictures in her mind, stoking a fire low in her belly. She scrambled for her next question, desperate to regain control. And what about fantasies? What sort of scenarios do humans find most arousing? Jake's chuckle was pure sin. Sweetheart, you're opening up a whole can of worms with that one. Human fantasies run the gamut, from the sweet and romantic to the downright depraved. But I've always been partial to a bit of power play myself, the thrill of surrendering control, letting your partner take the reins and drive you wild. He leaned back, stretching languidly, and Kylo Thea couldn't tear her eyes away from the play of muscles beneath his uniform. Of course, there's something to be said for the classics, too. Role-playing, public displays of affection, a little light bondage. The possibilities are endless. Kylo's head was spinning. She tried to focus on her notes, but the words swam before her eyes. How was she supposed to concentrate when Jake kept dropping these tantalizing hints about human sexuality? Oh, and let's not forget about the fixation on certain body parts. Jake continued, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Humans have a whole lexicon devoted to describing the perfect pair of legs, the curve of a hip, the swell of a breast. He grinned, eyes twinkling. In fact, we have so many words for breasts alone. It's practically a language unto itself. Tits, boobs, knockers, hooters. The list goes on. The casual way he discussed such intimate matters, the knowing smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, the flex of his biceps under that tight uniform, it was all too much. And that's why we have so many words for breasts, Jake finished, leaning back with a satisfied grin. Kylo blinked, realizing she'd completely lost the thread of the conversation. I see, she managed, voice strangled. That's very illuminating. Jake studied her for a long moment, head tilted. You know, if you really want to understand human attraction, you might need a more hands-on approach. Kylo's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He leaned in close, voice low and rumbling. I mean, there are some things you can't learn from a textbook. Sometimes you gotta dive in and get a little messy. Kylo Thea's breath caught. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell the intoxicating musk of his skin. Her mind raced with all the deliciously filthy things he could do to her with that supercharged human libido. No, bad Kylo. She was a professional. Damn it. She couldn't let herself be seduced by a walking hormone bomb, no matter how tempting the package. She jerked back, nearly toppling out of her chair. I think that's enough for today, she squeaked, gathering her notes with shaking hands. Thank you for your cooperation. Jake looked bemused but shrugged. Anytime, Doc. You know where to find me if you need any more insights. Kylo fled the lounge, heart pounding and core throbbing. Stars above, what was wrong with her? She was acting like a giddy schoolgirl, not a respected scientist. She needed to get a grip. So what if human males were walking factories of virility? So what if Jake made her want to do unspeakably wicked things to his person? She had a job to do, but as she lay in bed that night, tossing and turning, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in way over her head. The mysteries of human sexuality seemed vast and unfathomable, and her traitorous body yearned to uncover them all. With a frustrated groan, Kylo buried her face in her pillow. This assignment was going to be the death of her. But oh, what a way to go. The next few weeks were a delicious torture for Kylo. She found herself spending more and more time with Jake, ostensibly for her research but really just to bask in his magnetic presence. He was only too happy to oblige, regaling her with tales of human courtship and copulation that left her equal parts scandalized and enthralled. The way he described the dance of seduction, the thrill of the chase, the ecstasy of surrender, it was like nothing Kylo had ever experienced. Oh sure, her own species had their mating rituals, but they were so clinical, so perfunctory. A brief exchange of pheromones, a quick coupling, and then back to work. There was no passion, no fire. But the way Jake talked about sex, it was like a religion, a celebration of life and pleasure and connection. Kylo Thea found herself longing to be worshipped at that altar. It didn't help that Jake seemed to take every opportunity to touch her. A brush of his hand against hers as they walked, a playful nudge of his shoulder, a lingering hug that set her whole body ablaze. Kylo knew she was playing with fire. She was a scientist, not some lust-struck fool. She couldn't afford to get attached to her subject, no matter how devastatingly charming he might be. But with each passing day, her resolve weakened. She found herself dreaming of Jake's strong hands on her body, his lips against her skin. She imagined him taking her to heights of pleasure she'd never even conceived of, worshipping her with that legendary human stamina. It all came to a head one night in the lab. Kylo Thea was working late, trying to distract herself from her growing obsession, when Jake sauntered in with a bottle of some exotic human liquor. "Thought you could use a break," he said with a grin, pouring her a glass. "All work and no play, you know." Kylo hesitated, but the temptation was too great. She took a sip and nearly gasped at the way it burned down her throat, warming her from the inside out. One drink turned into two, then three. Soon they were both pleasantly buzzed, giggling like school children as they traded stories of their wildly different upbringings. Wait, Jake said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "You're telling me that on your planet, Kids are expected to choose their career path at age 5? Kylothea nodded, grinning. Yep. I announced my intention to become a xenobiologist at my first spawning day party. My clutchmates thought I was crazy. Jake shook his head in wonder. Man, that's wild. On Earth, kids that age are still figuring out how to tie their shoes and not eat paste. Paste? Kylothea wrinkled her nose in confusion. Never mind, Jake chuckled. Point is, we don't expect our kids to have their whole lives mapped out before they lose their baby teeth. Kylothea leaned forward, fascinated. So what did you want to be when you were 5? Jake's grin turned sheepish. Promise not to laugh? Cross my hearts, Kylo said solemnly. I wanted to be a dinosaur. Kylo blinked. A what now? A dinosaur. They were these giant reptiles that roamed Earth millions of years ago. I was obsessed with them as a kid. Kylo tried valiantly to keep a straight face, but a giggle escaped despite her best efforts.
I'm sorry.
I'm just picturing tiny Jake stomping around roaring at people. Jake laughed, throwing up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, at least I had a dream, even if it was physically impossible. Fair enough, Kylo conceded, taking another sip of her drink. The liquor was making her feel warm and loose, lowering her inhibitions in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. So, what about dating? She asked, emboldened by the buzz. When do humans start pursuing romantic partners? Jake leaned back, considering. It varies, but usually around puberty. That's when all those hormones start kicking in, and we start noticing the opposite sex. Kylo nodded, fascinated. On her world, mating was a strictly regulated affair, arranged by the elders for maximum genetic diversity. The idea of choosing one's own partner based on something as frivolous as attraction was foreign to her. And your parents just let you? She asked incredulously. They don't have any say in the matter? Jake shrugged. I mean, they might offer advice or opinions, but ultimately it's up to the individual. We believe in following our hearts. Hearts? Kylo echoed, placing a hand over her own fluttering chest. She was starting to understand the appeal of the human way, even if it seemed terribly inefficient from a biological standpoint. Jake's eyes followed the movement, darkening with an emotion Kylo couldn't quite name. What about your first kiss? He asked, voice dropping to a husky register. Do you remember it? Kylo flushed, suddenly feeling overheated. We don't really do that on my planet. Kissing, I mean. Jake looked scandalized. You're kidding. Never. She shook her head, biting her lip. It's considered unsanitary, an unnecessary exchange of bacteria. Oh, Kylo, Jake murmured, leaning in close. You have no idea what you've been missing. Kylo found herself mesmerized by the way Jake's lips moved as he spoke, the glint of his teeth, the bob of his Adam's apple. She wanted to taste him, to consume him whole. As if reading her mind, Jake leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. You know, Kylo, there's one human mating ritual we haven't discussed yet. She shivered, pulse racing. Oh? And what's that? His hand found her thigh under the table, fingers tracing maddening circles. The art of foreplay, of driving your partner wild with anticipation until they're begging for release. Kylo let out a shaky breath, heat pooling in her core. I'm not sure that's relevant to my research, she managed, voice trembling. Jake chuckled, low and dark. Oh, but it is. How can you truly understand human sexuality without experiencing it firsthand? He leaned in closer, lips a hair's breadth from hers. Let me show you, Kylo. Let me worship you the way you deserve. Kylo's last shred of resistance crumbled with a moan of surrender. She closed the distance between them, claiming his mouth in a searing kiss. Jake responded with a growl of triumph, hauling her into his lap as he deepened the kiss. His tongue plundered her mouth, a taste of whiskey and desire, as his hands roamed her body with breathtaking skill. He found the hidden zipper of her uniform, tugging it down with agonizing slowness as he nibbled a path along her jawline. You have no idea how long I've wanted this, he rasped against her skin. Wanted you. Kylo could only whimper in response, arching into his touch like a woman possessed. Every nerve ending was on fire, every cell screaming for more. Jake took his time undressing her, worshipping each new inch of skin with lips and teeth and tongue. He seemed determined to map every curve and hollow, to find every secret spot that made her gasp and writhe. By the time he finally laid her back on the lab table, Kylo was a quivering mess of need. She'd never been so desperate, so wanting. She wanted him inside her, around her, consuming her utterly. Please, she begged, hardly recognizing her own voice. I need you, Jake. Need you so much. He smiled down at her, eyes dark with lust and something deeper, more profound. I've got you, baby. I'm going to make you feel so good. And then he was everywhere, his body blanketing hers as he claimed her with deep, powerful strokes. Kylo cried out in ecstasy, nails raking down his back as she urged him deeper, harder, faster. Jake set a relentless pace, pounding into her with a force that shook the table. The lab filled with the sounds of their coupling, the slap of flesh on flesh, the creak of metal, the ragged panting and guttural moans. Kylo Thea had never known pleasure like this. It was raw and primal and all-consuming, a tidal wave of sensation that threatened to sweep her away entirely. She could feel her climax building, coiling tighter and tighter in her core until she thought she might shatter from the pressure. And then Jake changed his angle, hitting a spot deep inside her that made stars explode behind her eyes. That's it, baby, he growled, grinding against her. Come for me, let me feel you. With a wordless cry of rapture, Kylo flew apart in his arms, her body convulsed around him, milking his own release as he emptied himself inside her with a shout of triumph. They collapsed together in a sweaty, sated tangle, hearts racing as they struggled to catch their breath. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the machines and the sound of their panting. Finally, Jake lifted his head, a wicked grin playing about his lips. So, Doc, still think you can remain objective? Kylo laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Shut up and kiss me, you smug bastard. As their mouths met in a languid, thorough kiss, Kylo knew her report would never be the same. How could it be when she'd experienced firsthand the sheer primal power of human sexuality? But somehow, wrapped in Jake's arms, with the taste of him still on her tongue, she couldn't bring herself to care. Let the galaxy think what it would of her research. She had found something far more precious. A connection that transcended species and reason, a bond forged in the crucible of passion. And as Jake rolled her beneath him for round 2, Kylo Thea knew she would never be the same. She had been ruined for all others, marked by human desire in the most exquisite way. The mysteries of human sexuality were vast indeed, but oh, what a joy it would be to unravel them all, one blissful coupling at a time.